I'd like to call to order this special meeting of the City of Sonoma Planning Commission for March 29th, 2018. And may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Jansen.
Here.
Commissioner Melander.
Here.
Chair Felder.
Here?
Commissioner Corrado.
Here.
Commissioner McDonald.
Here.
Commissioner Cribb.
Here. And may I ask Commissioner Cribb to lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening to everyone. Just a couple of administrative items before we start. First of all, please put your cell phones or other devices on silent mode so they don't cause a disturbance during the meeting. Secondly, we will be using a timer tonight. I'm asking everyone from the public to please limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. And I will give you not much leeway beyond that, so please try to respect that. If there's any decisions reached tonight by the Planning Commission, those may be appealed to the City Council within 15 days. And with that, I will take comments from the public on items not appearing on tonight's agenda. Please state your name and address.
Good evening, Chair Felder and members of the Commission. I'm actually taking this time to take the opportunity that I didn't have last Thursday night to thank David for all of his hard work for this community and during the time as a commissioner and during the last 30 years as being an architect in this community and working with you. Our community has been well served over those 30 years. Sorry to hear that you're leaving, though. Bye.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else? Seeing no one, I will close the public comments for this portion of the agenda. And are there any changes to tonight's agenda?
No, sir.
Seeing none, late correspondence.
That's at your place from Vic Conforti and Carol Marcus.
Thank you. And we have no minutes to review tonight, so we'll move to the first item, which is a public hearing for an application for use permit, tentative map, and related approvals for mixed-use development at 870 Broadway. And with that, I'll take the staff report from Mr. Goodison.
Thank you, Chair Felder and members of the Planning Commission. This property is a 1.86 acre site. It's located at the northeast corner of Broadway and MacArthur Street. It's been used for auto sales, rentals, and repairs since 1925, but that use closed in 2011. Development on the property consists of a 6,000 square foot auto showroom, a rather large building with the appearance of a barn that's been used for storage, as well as an automotive paint shop, and a 1,000 square foot wood frame garage building. And large areas of the site have been paved for use as vehicle display areas and storage. Adjoining uses include mixed-use development with offices and apartments. To the south, there's the MacArthur Place Hotel, which is, of course, across East MacArthur Street. On the east, a duplex and an open space preserve. And to the west, an apartment development and commercial uses. This site has a general plan land use designation of mixed use and a corresponding mixed use zoning designation. In addition, the property is located within the historic overlay zone. The northeast corner of the property lies within a creek setback associated with Nathanson Creek. Just by way of background, some members of the commission saw these proposals. I know that others did not, but this site has been the subject of a number of development proposals within the last couple of years. In October and November of 2014, the Planning Commission conducted study sessions on a mixed-use project addressing both the subject property and the gas station property across the street at 899 Broadway. That concept envisioned a 36-room hotel, a food-oriented commercial component with an area of about 5,000 square feet, 15 apartment units, and on-site parking along with an off-site parking lot at the 899 Broadway site that would be operated with a valet service. In response to concerns raised regarding the use of the 899 Broadway property as a parking lot, the adequacy of the parking provided, and the practicality of the valet service, a revised proposal was presented in which the hotel component was eliminated. Under that proposal, the 870 Broadway site would have been developed with 20 townhomes, an expanded culinary promenade with 7 live-work units above that component. The 899 Broadway site would have been redeveloped with 10 townhomes and a small retail space. And this proposal, too, provoked significant concerns regarding building mass, intensity of use, parking adequacy, and conformance with the design guidelines of the Broadway corridor. It was ultimately withdrawn. Subsequently, the property owner brought in a different development team with the focus on a purely residential concept featuring variations of between 22 and 30 multifamily residences. The iterations of this concept were reviewed by the Planning Commission over the course of 2014-2015, but it too was ultimately dropped because many commissioners felt that the mix of unit sizes was excessively weighted towards larger units. In addition, several members of the Planning Commission expressed a preference for a project having a commercial component. Now let's- Yeah. All right, so on the site, on the screen above us right now is a site plan that was reviewed by the Planning Commission last September. And so this preliminary proposal was reviewed by the Planning Commission in a study session format. And I wanted to kind of start off with this site plan because it shows how this proposal was initially organized with a commercial building in the front, actually a mixed-use building in the front with a commercial component below, and I believe 10 units above that. And then the remainder of the units organized around that with buildings arranged along the edges, the north edge of the site with access from Broadway, and 2 access points from East MacArthur Street. When the Planning Commission reviewed that proposal, they appreciated the mixed-use component and the emphasis on smaller residential units. Actually, let me talk about this a little bit more deeply. Yes, the commercial space on the lower floor featured 10 one-bedroom apartments located on the second floor. That building was proposed with a height of 33 feet 9 inches. Another 29 residences took the form of townhomes. These were grouped in 8 clusters wrapping around the mixed-use building. These were all proposed as 3-story buildings with a height of 35 feet. And for vehicle circulation, 2 main access driveways were proposed, one on Broadway and one on East MacArthur Street. But there was a secondary access on East MacArthur Street as well. And with regard to parking, each townhome featured a 2-car garage. 11 additional covered parking spaces were to be located on the east side of the mixed-use building, and another 24 uncovered spaces were proposed for a total of 93 parking spaces. In its review of this concept, the Planning Commission expressed concerns about the height of the buildings adjoining the street and the architectural design of the mixed-use building. Several commissioners expressed the view that the site plan was overly autocentric. On the other hand, the commissioners appreciated the mixed-use component and the emphasis on smaller residential units. So now let's look at what is before us today. In this proposal, the concept calls for the redevelopment of the site, again with a mixed-use development, this time featuring 35 residences and 4,100 square feet of commercial space. So that's a reduction in density from the proposal that was reviewed in September. The commercial space would accommodate up to 3 tenant spaces. The plan, again, places the mixed-use building at the southeast corner of the site aligned with Broadway. The lower floor would consist of commercial space, but in this iteration, there are 4 two-bedroom flats located on the second floor. This building would have a height of 30 feet. 8 apartment units divided between 2 fourplex buildings would be located north of that mixed-use building fronting Broadway, while 3 detached units would be placed along the West MacArthur Street frontage. The remaining residences would take the form of townhomes grouped among 5 building clusters located within the interior of the site. These would all be 3-story buildings with heights ranging from 32 to 35 feet, these internal buildings. And the northeast corner of the site, which lies partially within a creek setback, would be used as a common open space area. As set forth in the staff report, the unit sizes, excluding garage areas, range from 486 square feet to 1,934 square feet. The townhouse units all feature 2-car garages. A network of interior sidewalks would allow for pedestrian circulation, while for vehicle circulation, access would be limited to a single driveway on East MacArthur Street. However, a secondary emergency access point would be provided also connecting to East MacArthur Street. So in this proposal, there is no access into the site from Broadway. That simplifies the circulation, and it certainly improves what can be done with the Broadway frontage. In terms of other changes that this site plan reflects in comparison to the September proposal, the design of the mixed-use building has been streamlined and its height has been reduced to 30 feet. The heights of the apartment units fronting Broadway have been reduced to 25 feet and 26 feet 6 inches. And the height of the residences facing East MacArthur Street have been lowered to 25 feet. Also, with respect to just design issues, the building frontages are now much more oriented towards the street with porches, front doors, and elevations that clearly engage with the street frontages in all cases. So that all of the townhome clusters with a height in excess of 30 feet are located now in the interior of the site. The number of residential units has been reduced by 4. The unit mix now features a greater variety of unit types as 4 two-bedroom condominium flats are proposed. However, there are also now 3 larger units included in the mix in the form of separate residences fronting East MacArthur Street. Overall, the revised site plan greatly improves the project with respect to how it addresses both Broadway and East MacArthur Street. In addition, the vehicle circulation has been simplified, and pedestrian circulation and amenities have been strengthened. So just to take a look at the renderings, this is a view of the mixed-use building from Broadway and MacArthur Street. These are the apartment buildings that would front Broadway, and these are the 3 detached units that would front East MacArthur Street. In terms of the general plan, again, the project site has a land use designation of mixed use. That designation encompasses a variety of purposes. It's intended to provide additional opportunities for higher density housing, as well as commercial and mixed use development. The designation allows a density to 20 units per acre, but the land use definition specifically acknowledges that density bonuses are also available. The proposed project density amounts to 19 units per acre, which complies with the normal base density allowance. We've tried to summarize project consistency with the general plan in the staff report, and I don't want to go through each item, but a key general plan policy is to promote higher density infill development while ensuring that building mass, scale, and form are compatible with neighborhood and town character. This project is an infill development proposed at the high end of allowable density, as we will review in the discussion of the environmental evaluations. It's staff's take that the project will be visually compatible with its surroundings and will not degrade the visual quality of the site or its surroundings. This project would also preserve the creek setback area that's associated with the site. It would incorporate erosion control and soil conservation practices, and it would not create any traffic impact at the intersection of Broadway and West MacArthur Street. With regard to the development code, the property is located within the mixed-use zoning district, and as with the mixed-use general plan designation, that district is intended to allow for higher density housing types such as apartments and condominiums, both separately and in conjunction with commercial and office development, in order to increase housing opportunities, reduce dependence on the automobile, and provide a pedestrian presence in commercial areas. We review in the staff report, the building setbacks, floor area ratio, site coverage, open space, roof height, and parking. And just to kind of go through those, in the zoning designation, the minimum front and street side setbacks are 15 feet, and these are met in the proposal, slightly exceeded in some cases, especially on the Broadway frontage where some of the setbacks are 18 feet. The floor area ratio is a maximum of 1.0. It's proposed in this project at 0.87. The maximum site coverage allowance is 60%. This proposal that's before you tonight has site coverage of about 61 to 64%. That includes permeable paving, however. With regard to open space, the open space requirement is exceeded in this project. The maximum building height in the zoning designation is 30 to 36 feet, and the roof heights as proposed in this project range from 25 feet to 35 feet, with, again, the higher units located within the interior of the site. Parking, just to get into that in a little bit more detail, each of the townhome units, again, has a 2-car garage and 10 covered parking spaces adjoin the commercial building. There's a total of 77 parking spaces overall. The normal minimum parking requirement for 35 multifamily units would be 66 spaces, while the parking requirement for the commercial building area is 14 spaces. That results in a total of 80 parking spaces. However, the development code allows for the Planning Commission to reduce the parking requirement associated with a mixed-use development if it finds that the parking demand associated with different use types are complementary. So in essence, this could allow for a reduction of up to 14 parking spaces at the discretion of the Planning Commission. And again, 77 parking places are proposed. Bicycle parking is provided for in this project with secure covered bicycle parking that is incorporated with the mixed-use building. In terms of a residential component under the property's mixed-use zoning designation, a residential component is normally required of at least 50% of the proposed building area. The project greatly exceeds that standard in that more than 90% of the building area that's proposed is residential. Inclusionary housing. The development code requires that 20% of the units within residential developments of 5 or more units be designated as affordable housing at the low or moderate income level. In this project, 8, that's a correction to the staff report, 8 affordable units are proposed. That exceeds the 20% requirement by 1 unit. With respect to the design of inclusionary units, the development code provides for the following. The location of density bonus units within the qualifying projects may be at the discretion of the developer. Normally, inclusionary affordable units should be reasonably dispersed throughout the development and should be compatible with the design or use of the market rate units in terms of appearance, materials, and finish quality. The clustering of affordable units may be permitted by the Planning Commission when consistent with the design and planning characteristics of a particular development. The applicants are requesting, in this instance, that the inclusionary units be clustered as apartment units within the 2 fourplexes. In support of this proposal, they are offering to provide an additional affordable unit beyond the minimum requirement and to provide 4 of the units as affordable at the 100% of area median income level, which is below the normal requirement of 110% for moderate income units. This project is located within the historic overlay zone, and there are special findings that need to be made for the approval of any such project within that zoning district, and we review those in the staff report. There are also design guidelines that apply to any development in the Broadway corridor, and we review those as well in the staff report. For example, proposed dwellings shall be placed on their site so that the narrow dimension of the structure is parallel to the narrower dimension of the parcel, and so that the primary entrance to the building faces to the public street. So along East MacArthur Street, the residences present the narrow dimension to the street. This is not the case with the two fourplexes on Broadway. However, the desired effect can be achieved by strengthening the vertical elements of those structures. And along both frontages, the residences are oriented towards the street. Buildings should reinforce the scale, massing, proportions, and detailing established by other significant historic buildings in the vicinity, if any. The mixed-use building, which is the most prominent structure on the site, features an updated craftsman style that evokes a number of older homes along Broadway. The massing and architecture of this building have been streamlined relative to the previous proposal, and the level of detailing in staff's view is appropriate and not overly busy. The massing of larger commercial mixed-use buildings should be broken down to an appropriate scale. This needs to be better addressed in the findings for approval because the mixed-use building is, of course, greater than 5,000 square feet. However, I think that it can certainly be stated that the massing of this building has been broken down through differences through variation in the facade of that building, through the use of a ground floor porch element, and through the use of balconies on the upper floors, and through the use of differentiated building entrances for the commercial tenant spaces. So we believe that that guideline is met as well. Architectural styles and details that reflect this number of vernacular should be used along Broadway. Victorian and other residential architectural styles are more typical than purely commercial building types. The mixed-use building, again, features an updated craftsman style that, in staff's view, is appropriate for Broadway. The three residences facing East MacArthur Street are differentiated in their architectural detail, but they are basically traditional. The two fourplexes on Broadway carry over elements of the mixed-use building, which provides some continuity and is appropriate to their residential use and their location on the Broadway frontage. Several of the townhome clusters within the interior of the site feature a contemporary design, but these are not readily visible from either Broadway or East MacArthur Street. Site design and architectural features that contribute to pedestrian comfort and interest, such as awnings, recessed entrances, and alleys are encouraged. And in staff's view, the revised site plan greatly improves pedestrian circulation and amenities throughout the property. Moving on to environmental review, an initial study was prepared to analyze the potential impacts of the project. In this evaluation, different studies were commissioned addressing cultural resources, hazardous materials, and traffic. In addition, the project architect prepared prospective visual simulations to assist in evaluating visual compatibility. And we summarized those studies in the staff report, but suffice it to say that first, with regard to aesthetics and visual compatibility, the project is substantially consistent with the applicable standards in the development code that relate to visual character, and it is also substantially consistent with the design guidelines of the historic overlay zone and of the Broadway corridor. With respect to project design and its site planning and architecture, the project has been designed to appropriately address Broadway and East MacArthur Street. The mixed-use building, which is the most prominent structure, is located at the corner of Broadway and MacArthur Street, which is exactly where it should be. Is called for in the Broadway corridor design guidelines. Its architectural approach incorporates residential detailing, but it has a substantial quality and is not overly ornate. The two fourplexes located along Broadway to the north are at a smaller scale. That creates a transition to the development pattern associated with the narrower lots along Broadway that are further to the north. And on East MacArthur Street, the three separate residences also create an appropriate transition to the traditional residential pattern east of the site. So in summary, we found that the project would not have a significant impact with regard to aesthetics. With respect to biological resources, the property has been designed to retain and preserve the area that's associated with the creek setback, and the project would be designed not to drain into that area. and and construction requirements would be imposed to ensure that construction does not intrude in that area during the construction process. This project has been evaluated with respect to cultural resources. And this site does have a very interesting history that's described in the staff report that dates back to 1864 when it was developed as a college that later served as Sonoma's first public high school. But over the years, the historic buildings on the site have been eliminated or altered beyond recognition. And so there are no historic resources on the site today that could be impacted by the project. With respect to archaeological and tribal resources, to assess the site, for such resources, a professional evaluation was performed, including archival research. No such resources were found, but the potential does exist for unexpected discovery during the construction phase, and we have appropriate mitigation measures to address that contingency. A noise study was prepared, and the conclusions of that study are set forth in the staff report. In essence, this project will be required to provide for heating and cooling systems that allow residents to keep their windows closed if they so desire, to make sure that interior noise levels are consistent with state and local standards. That's necessary because the site is located right along Broadway, and traffic conditions on Broadway are such that without that measure, interior noise levels could exceed acceptable standards. Hazardous materials. A lot of information has been developed with respect to hazardous materials, given the history of the site as an auto sales and service center. But in summary, while contamination was identified through early studies that were performed on the property, those initial studies also identified remediation requirements, and all of those requirements have been implemented. So in essence, soils testing that was performed in conjunction with the remediation efforts showed that the soil excavation was successful in removing contaminated soil. So the site has been thoroughly investigated with respect to hazardous materials. It's been the subject of testing, study, and remediation, all of which have been implemented. And the conclusion is that the site has been successfully remediated in that area. Traffic and transportation. To evaluate the potential impacts of the project with respect to traffic and transportation, a traffic impact study was prepared by a qualified transportation engineer who is with us today, Daleen Whitlock of W-Trans. This evaluation addressed both traffic conditions as well as pedestrian circulation, vehicle safety, and associated issues. But just to focus on level of service, the study looked at the intersection of Broadway and MacArthur Street. That's a four-legged signalized intersection. Traffic counts show that the intersection currently operates at LOS B during the morning peak period and LOS C, level of service C, during the peak PM period. The project is expected to generate about 386 trips per day, including 19 trips during the AM peak hour and 35 trips during the peak PM hour. However, looking at that level of traffic activity in conjunction with existing and projected level of service shows that even under traffic conditions projected for the year 2040, the peak AM period would remain at LOSC, or would drop rather from LOSB to LOSC, while the peak PM period would change from LOSC. Actually, Daleen, have I got that right? I'd like you to weigh in on the traffic study if you don't mind. I don't want to mess it up and have you correct me. And so it stays at C in the future. In other words, this project just doesn't generate a sufficient level of traffic to have any significant impact on the operation of this intersection. In terms of other issues with respect to project and design, to begin with project design and visual compatibility, this has been a thorny issue with previous development proposals that the Planning Commission has reviewed And the first iteration of the subject application also had some issues in that regard. However, the revised proposal has been substantially improved, and in staff's view, it includes a number of positive features. The design of the mixed-use building has been streamlined, and it has been reduced in its massing and height. The site plan provides appropriate transitions along both frontages with smaller scale buildings in keeping with the residential patterns found on Broadway and on East MacArthur Street. The updated site plan reduces paved areas devoted to vehicles while providing a clear pedestrian pathway system and related amenities. The creek setback and floodway area is preserved and used as a landscaped amenity for residents, and an additional common open space area is proposed on Broadway. With respect to the mix of unit types, the revised project provides an even greater variety of unit types, as it now includes apartments, flats, townhomes, and 3 detached homes. The density has been decreased, slightly, and the 3 detached units are relatively large. However, on the balance, the units are relatively small, including 8 one-bedroom apartments with an area of 486 square feet, and even the 3 detached units do not exceed 2,000 square feet in area. Most of the townhomes don't exceed 1,500 square feet in area. So it's a good mix, and it's heavily weighted at the lower end of the range. Again, with respect to the inclusionary requirement, the applicants are requesting that inclusionary units be clustered as apartment units within the 2 fourplexes. Normally, inclusionary units are to be distributed throughout a development, but clustering is allowed at the discretion of the Planning Commission. As we've discussed, the applicants are proposing to provide an additional affordable unit beyond the minimum requirement, and to provide 4 of the units at a level of 100% of the area median income, which is below the normal requirement of 110% of area median for moderate income units. So they would still be moderate income units, but they would be more affordable moderate income units. 4 of them would be. The others would be at the normal 110% of AMI rent level. In staff's view, the addition of the extra affordable unit and the greater level of affordability for 4 of the units represents an acceptable trade-off in exchange for allowing the units to be clustered. I'd also like to note that is a more late-breaking issue that's not reflected in the staff report. Well, first, just to back up a second, this project is located next to Nathanson Creek. So it's located, part of the site is encompassed within a creek setback area, and part of the site is within a FEMA flood zone. And so that issue has been extensively analyzed both in this project and in previous development proposals. But one thing that staff missed in this iteration is that this unit within building at the north end of, I believe it's building 7, which adjoins this creek setback area, encroaches into what's called a floodway. And in talking to the building department about this issue initially, planning staff just misunderstood what the mitigation requirement was, and we have it in there as simply that there needs to be a flood elevation certificate that verifies that it is out, that the finished floor is above the 100-year floodplain. But in fact, in order to locate any portion of that building within this floodway, there is an extra study that would need to be performed to validate that the inclusion of that building at that location would not increase flood levels, and that study hasn't been performed. So there are obvious ways to address this issue. For example, that unit at the north end of Building 7 can simply be eliminated, in which case that issue would be solved. But the applicants would like to take some time to look at that question and whether or not they want to perform that study, reconfigure the unit, and in any case, we didn't want to just drop this as a last-minute change to conditions of approval. So we're not recommending that the Planning Commission take action on the on this item tonight. Instead, we'd like the Planning Commission to continue this item to your regular meeting in May so that we can take our time and make sure that this particular issue is appropriately addressed and make sure that the Planning Commission has an opportunity to review any changes in the site plan that might result from this change. We don't regard this as a substantial issue. We know that it can be addressed, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we do so in a way that is just clearly vetted and available for review by both the public and the Planning Commission and anyone interested in the project. So again, we're not going to recommend approval of the project tonight so that we can investigate this question and come up with a clear proposal to address it. But that said, I do want to just make a couple of final points about this project. We believe that this proposal is fundamentally sound. It's a good site plan that is responsive to key directions by the Planning Commission that have been given over the course of different reviews that have been made for this proposal, made for this site since 2015. The Planning Commission had said to keep the building heights at 30 feet or less along the property frontages. This site does that. The Planning Commission has said that building designs need to engage the street frontages. This site plan does that. The Planning Commission has said that any taller units need to be located in the interior of the site. This proposal does that. The Planning Commission has said that it would like a commercial component, but it wants the emphasis to be on residential. This site plan does that. And the Planning Commission has said that it wants to see a mix of unit types that are weighted at the smaller size range. This site plan provides a good mix of unit types, and it's clearly weighted at the smaller range with regard to unit sizes. So we feel that the applicant has made a good proposal, especially in response to the direction the Commission gave in the previous study session, and we plan on returning to the Planning Commission in May with a refined proposal that addresses this floodway issue and any other kinds of revisions or refinements that come out of the discussion tonight. But we feel that this is a sound project and that it will be ultimately something that the Commission can support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for that report. Are there questions for staff?
Yeah, I had one, and I just, and maybe this is for the consultant, because in doing the parking analysis, I know in the late correspondence we got, the issue was raised about, the garages being private versus and I just want to make sure, because the way I read the parking analysis was that it took into account that, in fact, that a significant number, and it was like taking that in. Can I just get clarification on that from that issue was addressed actually in the analysis? That's how I read it, and I just wanted to make sure that that was true.
In looking, my name is Daleen Whitlock, I'm with W-Trans. In looking at the shared parking model, the first thing it does is take any spaces that are in garages, and it X's those out. That supply is not available for anybody else. So the only thing we look at in terms of the shared parking is those spaces that are outside of the garages and can be shared between uses. So, if you have, the retail use will want the spaces during the day, whereas the residential uses them more at night, or their guests tend to be there more at night. So that's how that's kind of the benefit of shared parking, is that those spaces can be used by different aspects of the project at different times of the day. But we absolutely do take into account the fact that garages, those spaces are not shared.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And if I could just add to that, when we return to the Planning Commission, we've, been looking at that issue as well, and I think that we'll have slightly revised conditions that address the hours of the commercial use to better ensure that there is that complementary level of activity between the commercial uses and the residential uses so that that overlap can and will occur.
Thank you.
David, what impact, if you took away that unit, would it have on the parking? How many would it reduce?
Well, it eliminates the 2 garage spaces that are associated with that unit, but those units don't really contribute to the, the other uses on the property. And in our view, if that unit were to be removed, then consideration might be given to possibly eliminating that parking space to the north of it, but that's just something that we would want to take a closer look at.
I'm going to just hitchhike on that a bit. In looking at the parking requirements, it's not obvious to me on whether the calculation that allows for how many guest parking spaces are required has been computed correctly. If we count all of the garage spaces as designated spaces and some of the ones under the flats as designated spaces, those cannot then be added to the available guest parking. Is that correct?
Well, again, we are taking a look at how the conditions of approval address that and would likely be updating the conditions of approval in that regard. But our thinking now is that the condominium spaces would have dedicated parking spaces, but the apartment units would not.
Okay. I guess I'm.
But that is something that we can look at in more detail.
I think it needs some more look. Okay, thank you.
I had a couple questions. One of the, and this is probably for staff and the traffic consultant. I wanted to get your feedback on your evaluation and analysis of the duplex driveway, which seems to be in excess of 25 feet wide, combined with the proposed main entrance to the development and driveway, which is about 26 feet wide. The combination of both those curb cuts would be a fairly excessive, curb cut, because there's really no transition between the duplex to the east and the proposed driveway. So my question to staff and the consultant is, did you look at that analysis, or in your analysis of having an excessive one single driveway in terms of pedestrian safety and auto safety, and and also was this looked at by the Public Works Department to see if there would be any sort of confusion on the part of the pedestrians or even autos entering and exiting from that configuration?
The Public Works, I'll certainly let the traffic consultant talk about her analysis, but the Public Works Director looked very carefully at this issue, and it was her preference that the driveway entrance be placed as far to the east as possible.
Okay. Well, I guess my question is, placing it as far east as possible, it pushes it up against an excessively large curb cut for the duplex. And so I was wondering, in your opinion, would that cause any sort of confusion for autos or pedestrians entering, or because there's it seems to be, it would be almost a 55-foot wide curb cut?
Well, I guess what I intended to say was I think that I believe that the Public Works Director was aware of that condition. I mean, she's visited the site and has looked at it, but I can follow up on that.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to also just reemphasize the fact of the mixed-use zone. And pretty much, my understanding is that pretty much any sort of use that would go into the commercial component would require a use permit. Is that correct? The Planning Commission would have to approve any use that would go in there?
Well, I think that you might want to predefine some retail uses that you would find acceptable, or just say that 3 retail tenant spaces are acceptable without wanting to review every possible type of retail use. I think that the Planning Commission would certainly want to look at any kind of food serving use very carefully to make sure that we weren't exceeding parking demand. But that's kind of up to the Planning Commission how you would like to address that.
Yeah, because I was just trying to, debate is if this was really a neighborhood serving commercial component, or would we allow something like a 7-Eleven or a liquor store, or, a coffee shop that might not necessarily be neighborhood serving, may bring people in off the street or off the highway that would exacerbate the parking that's provided?
Well, this would be subject to the formula retail restrictions that apply to the historic overlay zone, no matter what. But,
Okay.
so that's something to just keep in mind. Not just anything can go in there, and any restaurant use would require a use permit.
Okay. Yeah, as I was just wanted to reemphasize that, that we do have like some safeguards in place. The other question has to kind of piggybacks on the Building 7, one of the units that might need to be removed, or, to look at the floodway area. The initial study on the mitigation number 9, G, and H, there are established FEMA requirements that indicate that the finished floor of the structures are to be above the 100-year flood elevation. And I just wanted to make sure that the plans that we're reviewing, including the heights, one being 35 feet, 2 inches, account for this required finished floor elevation above the floodplain. I just want to make sure that we're not going to have a situation where, oh, guess what? We have to raise the
And the
site.
engineer is here tonight, I believe.
Okay, great.
It's
Great.
it's my understanding, though, that you're saying that condition is probably going to be looked at with the rest of the study on the...
Well, that condition is going to apply wouldn't apply no matter what.
If a building is allowed there.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking more generally in terms of the whole site itself. If there was a study that says, or there's, you need to raise everything up, 8 inches, and we've got buildings that are all going 8 inches to make sure they're out of the FEMA flood zone. So, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Carol?
I'm interested in this whole flood issue in that one building that seems to be affected, particularly the one unit. What would, if this building were existing today, okay, what would be the FEMA requirements for that building? Forget the city, I'm not talking about building codes or anything else. It's in existence. And are there other buildings in Sonoma that would fall into the same category that are in existence today?
Well, there are plenty of buildings within Sonoma, including buildings along Nathanson Creek, in particular, buildings along Nathanson Creek that don't comply with the requirement that I just mentioned because they were built a long time ago. But the city is charged with enforcing that requirement for new development, and we do. So any kind of building expansion would be subject to that requirement, but an existing building is just that, it's an existing building, and if it predates the requirement, that's just how it worked out.
And just kind of spitballing, if I can, okay? What sort of solutions do you see? I mean, if you think about it, the density of this project has been decreased, okay? It's not density excessive or anything else, okay? So rather than looking at the possibility of removing that particular building, okay, what would be the possible solutions that you would see to have it work to meet the city's requirements?
Well, one solution would be to conduct this floodway analysis. That would be prepared by a registered engineer with expertise in that area. And if that analysis demonstrated that the placement of this building element within the floodway did not have an effect on the 100-year flood surface, then it could be approved. So that's one option. I mean, it's quite conceivable that that would be the conclusion.
I would agree with that. Then that's the reason why I'm asking these questions, is because to have this project continued until May, when it seems like it could be conditioned that that be resolved, okay? I'm puzzled as to why it is that we're looking at a continuance of 2 months to resolve something that, is quite easily resolvable in my mind.
Well, that's the primary reason that we're requesting this continuance. But, as has been clear just through this initial discussion, other commissioners, have raised other issues that we're aware of that may require some further study and analysis. And we want to be able to take the time, and the applicants want to be able to take the time to do that, because there's just no, we definitely don't want to delay this project or any project unnecessarily. We just don't. But that said, we want to make sure that an approval, that if and when an approval is granted, it is solid and clearly defensible. And so we feel just in totality that is the best approach.
Through the chair, just maybe to clarify, I don't believe we would be able to actually certify the mitigated negative declaration or make the resolutions until that's resolved, so that in just in terms of the environmental review, we couldn't take action tonight.
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, I do want to be super clear. If that building was just cut back and was not in that floodway, then that issue wouldn't be an issue anymore, because it's not in the floodway. But again, our recommendation, and we don't make this recommendation lightly, is just to make sure that we have this project completely dialed in and fine-tuned and polished up before we make a recommendation for approval. And like I say, I'm quite certain that we can and will get there. But that's the recommendation. Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, I'm going to open up the public hearing, and I'll give the applicant a chance to address us. And if you will please state your name and address, and we'll give you 10 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you,
I
Mr.
hope
Chairman.
that's sufficient.
Ladies and gentlemen of the commission, I'm Barry McCormick. I'm president of Broadway and MacArthur, which is the limited liability company that is the applicant here. I want to fall on my sword a bit here, because Mr. Goodison, it's not his fault that this issue of FEMA came up at the last minute. It's our fault. We simply missed it. It's about 5 or 6 feet into the line, and we simply did not recognize that that was the case. So we appreciate his desire to work with us and solve that issue. We don't want to lose the unit. It's very valuable. And so we want the opportunity to do the study and hopefully come up with a solution that allows us to go forward with the unit included. If perchance that study is not in agreement with our position, then that one unit on the end will simply have to be deleted from the project for it to comply, and that would be the practical results of that. Let me just say in general that we have spent the last year working on this project. The revisions which you saw were not all of the revisions. There were several others that were done. And we have tried mightily, I must say, to satisfy members of the community, the staff in the city of Sonoma, all of the department heads, to make this a project that we all can be proud of. I am very happy to be able to possibly do a nice project in the city of Sonoma. It's a very important city in Northern California, and you obviously believe that, or you wouldn't spend the time that you do working on this planning commission. We have attempted, as we have put this project together and revised it, to adhere to the mandate in the city zoning laws that this project be designed in the vernacular of Sonoma. And we all know that defining the vernacular of Sonoma is pretty difficult. But when you get right down to it, what I think that the vernacular of Sonoma means is that this is a very unique and eclectic community in terms of its architectural styles and structures. And as I pointed out in one of the sessions that we had, possibly with the community, maybe with the Planning Commission in the study session, the plaza itself in Sonoma represents the eclectic nature of this entire community. It has, in one part of the building, the Italianate structure with the hip roof. It has in another part of the building the beautiful Spanish colonnades going up to the bell tower there. It's built in an indigenous stone, which has been very important to the community over the years, and it represents the diversity in architectural style that we have paid attention to, not necessarily in attempting to repeat those styles, but in attempting to capture the feeling of it being an eclectic community. So we're obviously disappointed that a continuance is likely forthcoming, but we understand and we will work with staff over the course of the next several weeks in trying to resolve these issues. I don't think we should go ahead and make a presentation tonight unless you encourage it, because it looks like we will be doing that again in another 6 weeks or 2 months. And so I'd like to save my ammunition, as it were, for that presentation. If you have any questions, happy to answer them.
Does anyone have a question for the applicant?
I had a few questions. I wanted to thank you again for putting together a new proposal and trying to work with the commission and the community and staff. I did have a couple of questions that might be able to provide clarity when we do have the public hearing. And some of these issues were raised in public comment too, in letters. One has to do with, if you take a look at the site plan and the commercial ground floor space and the common open space, I wanted to understand your decision or thought process in not connecting the commercial space visually and with pedestrian access to that common open space area. Was there a particular reason why you put the bike storage there?
I think that the real reason is that in designing and redesigning this site, we were coming down to a situation where we didn't have a lot of alternatives. And so the decision and the final analysis, well, let's do it where it can function efficiently and will serve what it's supposed to serve in terms of the people who will be using the bicycles in the community. I personally am a big believer in encouraging bicycle use, not just the pedal type, but I want to see, and we will have this in this project, some electrically assisted step-through bikes for old codgers like me to use.
Okay, and then the other question that had to do with some comments that we had, I think even at the last hearing, and it has to do with the retail space in relationship to the sidewalk and access.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to understand the raised platform for the commercial space. I'm just calculating it. There's about 4 steps, maybe 24 inches between the sidewalk and the actual building, and steps that are needed. I wanted to understand why the building is done that way, and then also if you could help walk me through the ADA access. I wanted to make sure that that was vetted before, if we're going to be looking at a final plan. I just want to make sure that how that takes place and what it's going to look like, maybe even a cross-section of the sidewalk versus the building. What I don't want ultimately to happen is us having to approve a series of ramps in the front of the building that takes away the street trees and the open space and the landscaping that really is an integral part of the design of the building.
Yes. So with respect to the raised porch, what we're trying to create there is the concept of a wide veranda with rocking chairs, comfortable seating, or people who are coming to visit the commercial can sit and enjoy being on the porch there and on the veranda. So the design is specifically to make it feel like a comfortable front porch of a private residence. With respect to ADA, we always are very, very diligent in terms of studying this issue, and our architects and our staff have taken that into consideration in detail, and we'll be happy to supply you that detail between now and the next hearing.
And one last question. This was something that I raised at the study session, and I know that you have been working with the sanitation district, but I just wanted to make sure that the individual totes and garbage totes that will be probably required for the townhomes, that will they be collected on site, or will they have to be presented to the street?
We have trash bins on site, enclosed trash bins on site there.
The Napa Sanitation.
Sir, please speak to the microphone, please.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Jeff McCormick, we talked to Sonoma Sanitation, and they're going to bring in their trucks for the residential portion. So each toter will be put in front of each unit.
Oh, great, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another question for the applicant.
This has to do with your commercial space
Yes.
and parking, which is a big issue here in Sonoma. And I don't want to get into your business because I don't think that's what we're here to do. But I'm concerned about what type of businesses you're going to put in there, because I'm not sure I agree with the compatibility issue for the guest parking. So what is in your mind about what you're going to put in there?
Right. We've taken sort of a broad look at this issue. There are a lot of different uses which we would like to consider. One of the things that we want to have there is services that serve the people that are living in that community, not people from outside the community, although they're welcome, of course. But we want to make sure that what we put there is convenient for the people who live there. And so that could be any number of things, but one of the most important components, I think, will be some kind of smaller grocery shops. We do want to do a dairy product shop with milk, butter, cheese, and artisan cheeses, and maybe some gourmet foods for the resident. Another thing that I would like to do is I would like to have a portion of that space to be something similar to a little community center for that neighborhood. I would like some sofas and lounge chairs inside, not just out on the porch. And I want it to be a community center in the sense that we could have a big community bulletin board there, and people could come and see what's going on in the neighborhood and that sort of thing. And one of the things, very important things that we're working on, is that we want to do a grocery delivery and pickup service so that people who live in that community can come, sit down at the desk, order groceries, and they would actually be picked up at a local grocery store and brought to the site for the residences there. I also, this is sort of a surprise to some of my cohort, I have purchased an 1887 Steinway desk piano, and I'm going to put that piano in what I would call the living room area, invite young folks from Sonoma to come and play the piano until they start driving the customers away, and then we'll close the top of the piano. But those are some of the kinds of things. Now, I heard the comment about coffee shop and traffic. I would really like to have a shop there that serves sandwiches, coffee, pastry, and wine. Now, we don't have any prospect in mind for that, but if I were a resident there, if I were living there, I would like to have that convenience. There's nowhere over in that area where you can go and get a sandwich and have a cup of coffee, have a pastry, and we would possibly bringing that sort of use back for approval.
Ron?
Your elevation of the commercial building is quite inviting. I'm a little concerned with the preliminary drawings that were done by Adobe Associates in terms of grading and drainage. It has called out for a lot of bio retention. I just would like to challenge the civil engineer to be as creative as possible to see if that requirement can be addressed someplace other than along principally the frontage of Broadway and secondarily the frontage of MacArthur, because that's going to be a very important elevation. And because, and I'm not arguing whether it's too big or too small, but your community building is quite large, and the streetscape is going to play a very important role in kind of bringing that down to more of a pedestrian scale. So I really would like you to challenge your civil to see if he can address that requirement somewhere other than the street frontage.
Yeah, indeed, and that elevation is also going to be dramatically affected by the landscaping. And what we tend to do in our projects is we tend to lean heavily towards landscaping in the projects. And as you obviously know, drainage has become a much more important and controlled issue than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So yes, we would indeed do that.
One more.
Excuse me, forgive me. I've got lots of allergies right now. When did it, I'm getting back to the flood encroachment on that, flood zone encroachment area on that one building. When did it come to your attention that that was going to be an issue?
Well, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but a good citizen of Sonoma wrote a letter, and 3 or 4 days ago, and that's when we knew.
So just out of curiosity, if it was 3 or 4 days ago and you knew there would be a continuance, why are we all here?
Well, I certainly did not
I could
know
try
there
to
was
speak to
going to
that.
be a
Yeah.
continuance.
I could try to speak to that. We felt initially that we had some pretty solid ways of dealing with it, and like I say, I think that on the whole that we do, but we're just trying to strike a balance between solving problems expeditiously and dumping things on the Planning Commission at the last minute. We don't like to do that. And we felt that, or I felt that, given the fact that this issue doesn't involve anything fundamental with respect to the site plan, that it would be useful to go ahead with this hearing in case there are other issues that people have, such as has been raised with respect to parking, so that as we address the floodway issue, we can also fine-tune the project in other ways that might be necessary as directed by the Planning Commission.
All right, one more.
I will, I promise. Just exactly on the guest parking spaces that are being provided in the project that are not related to the retail or are not dedicated to any particular unit, what are the guest parking spaces, and will they be so marked?
You know, we literally have not made a determination about that. I don't think that we had intended that they be marked. Frankly, we don't think that's going to be an issue in this particular project. In other words, the conflict between guest parking and other parking. And that we think it's not going to be an issue because we have provided so much parking otherwise. Certainly the residents are not going to park there because each of them have 2-car garages. every one.
Okay, well, thank you very much for
Very safe.
everything, and then I'm going to open the public hearing to other people from the public that would like to address us. Please step up to the podium, and you have 3 minutes, and state your name and address, please.
My name is Maria Biasetto, and I live here in Sonoma for the last over 33 years, but I have come here for the last 70 years. I lived in Marin County before, and I saw this beautiful town that deteriorated beyond my belief, and it hurt me. I do take a pride on Sonoma, and I take a pride on preserving the nature. I'm a nature lover. And I have a couple pieces of property within practically near to their place. And I restore my property to the glory of 1850. It cost me a lot of money to do that. And I took a pride. I was happy to do that. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I saw that the old houses that would be tearing down and building that parking lot or whatever it is right now, and it was really shocking. I couldn't believe it. And I talked to an old timer that there was born and raised in here and in politics, and I asked that person, I said, why did they tear those old Victoria house and build that one? Well, no offense to you, but he says in those days that there were no planning commissions, that they were active. If they were active, that they had better things to do, and I believe that, because we're looking at that lot for years and years to come. And I want to make sure that you people are responsible to know that after those people get their $1 million and gone, we are not sorry to have something that we regret. We want to be proud of our Sonoma. And Broadway is the gateway to the Sonoma historic preservation. And we wanted to have something there that we can be all proud and look at and not to turn our head. And I have two problems with that. One is at the parking place. The gentleman said that at every condominium have a 2 parking. I don't know. I couldn't figure that. I couldn't have that. But what about the business? 4,000 square feet. But you have to have at least 15 to 25 people working over there. And what about the people come and go? Where are they going to park? You know where they're going to park. Any place that they find open space, even in the front of your garage, and really they don't care, because nowadays people just don't care. They park where they have to park, period. So I'm very much concerned about that. You know, there is not enough parking. Also, that place, the location, if it was on West Spain or something like that, where the traffic is minimal, it wouldn't be so bad. It would be okay. But there's more traffic that goes through Broadway in 1 hour than it is in a secondary street. We want to have something there that we all can be proud.
I'm going to have to ask you to wind it up, please, Maria.
And I would suggest that the center of that place be put a little ornamental, like a fountain with, what did I suggest? A small rotunda in the center with some.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I hope that you do that.
Good evening, Chairman Felder and Planning Commissioners. My name is Carol Marcus, 873 First Street West. Your first decision this evening, before any discussion about the tentative map and use permit, is to decide whether or not you can adopt a mitigated negative declaration for the project. A mitigated negative declaration, as you know, means that any possible environmental impact can be mitigated to less than a significant level. I would like to argue that in its current form, the aesthetic impacts of this project cannot be mitigated to less than a significant level. I went into greater detail than I have time for tonight in the letter that I sent you yesterday. Though the staff report concludes that there will be less than a significant impact on scenic vistas, the same report also states that the existing buildings on the site already block northern views to the hills. Because this project is substantially taller and more massive than the existing buildings, one can only conclude that the views to the northern hills will be further impaired. The staff report also concludes that the project will not substantially degrade the existing visual character of the site or its surroundings. The project is inconsistent with Sonoma's design guidelines, in that it is inconsistent with development patterns along the Broadway corridor. Though they may have windows and balconies which face Broadway, the front doors of buildings 1 and 4 are on the backs of the buildings, where the cars are. What faces Broadway in these two buildings, other than the balconies, are the laundry closet and the clothes closet. The commercial building is 2 feet above sidewalk level. These buildings do not engage the street in a way that's consistent with existing development patterns here. The proposal does not support the existing architectural characteristics in the surrounding neighborhood, including mass, scale, proportion, or rhythm, and therefore is inconsistent with General Plan Policy 5.5, which states that new infill development should ensure that building mass, scale, and form are compatible with neighborhood and town character. It is not enough that this project complies with the Development Code standards of density and FARs. This is too important of a site. There is plenty of precedent for development projects in Sonoma which have complied with these quantitative characteristics not to be approved because they lacked the qualities that make Sonoma, Sonoma. As I stated in my letter, this project looks like it could be built anywhere in the United States. While it's clear that we need housing in Sonoma, this is not the form it should take. Though something desperately needs to be built on this site, let's not be so desperate that we accept something that is so unlike anything in Sonoma. I urge you not to adopt the mitigated negative declaration and to deny the tentative map and the use permit for this project.
Thank you, Carol. Anyone else?
Hello again. My name is Christine Batten. I'm a new resident. I live on Austin Avenue and was here a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about MacArthur Place. And this, again, is something that is in my backyard, literally. I loved what you just said. It echoes a lot of what I was going to say, so I will not say that. I will simply say that I'm concerned about the height of the buildings in the back of the project. And I also have a question. I'm just confused about the parking for the low-income units, the very small units. I get that the condos have 2 garage spaces. Where are the people who live in the high-density units going to park? Is that also provided for under the buildings or in the buildings?
Thank you very much.
Victor Conforti, 755 Broadway. David mentioned issues that might have fundamental effects on the project. And I believe that the historic preservation and infill zoning as part of the historic zone has provisions in it for front yard setbacks that differ with the standard setbacks for mixed-use zones because of their location in the Broadway Historic District. There are 2 different setbacks that have to be followed, criteria. One is that the setback be equal to the average of setbacks of buildings on both sides of the street within 100 feet of the project, and I just estimated that's probably a 35-foot average of setbacks within 100 feet of the subject property up and down both sides of Broadway. Excuse me. And then the second choice you have to, if you want to use, is that they equal the average of the 2 immediate buildings adjacent to your parcel. And on Broadway, that would be Len Tillum's building to the north, which is about 25 feet, and Suzanne Brangham's project, which is, huge setback, like 85 feet or something to the building. So either one of these criteria would create something more than 15 feet, which is the standard. So that would have a huge impact on the project. The parking issue, my analysis shows that there's a 19-space deficit in the project when you eliminate the private garages as somehow influencing guests and extra parking for the apartments. The mixed-use building, just as an example, it appears to have its own parcel created, which encompasses that probably for financing reasons, and its requirement per the development code for parking would be 21 spaces, and yet it only has 12 spaces on the parcel that it's sitting on, and 4 of those, I assume, would be the covered parking for the apartments that are on the upper floor. That would leave 8 spaces for the 4,100 square foot commercial use, and of course that's inadequate. It would also.
Thank you, Vic. I'm going to have to ask you to wind it up.
Okay. Yeah. The other thing was the complementary issue, and on weekends, retail uses, and especially some of the uses that have been discussed this evening, would not be compatible with residential. So thank you.
Vic.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Louis Braun. I'm at 871 First Street West. I'm here tonight to urge the Planning Commission to not grant the mitigated negative declaration. In contradiction to the staff report, the building mass and form of this project are not compatible with the neighborhood and town character. I feel it is your responsibility to share this view and perspective and give guidance to this developer on this matter. In terms of mass and scale, the proposed buildings are higher and more massive compared to anything in the area. So the project is not compatible in terms of mass and scale. In terms of town character, the proposed plan is not people-centric, not community-centric, but automobile-centric. According to the plan, when you drive through this place, you'd see row after row of blank, flat garage doors staring back at you on both sides. This does not reflect the character of our town. In our town, our front doors look out on our neighbors' front doors. This is our town's character. Quite literally, by having our front doors look out on our neighbors, we're looking out for each other. For the residents of this project, as currently proposed, would reflect a soulless anonymity. So the project is not compatible in terms of town character. It is true that we need more housing in Sonoma, and I'm not proposing that the developer put up a couple big craftsman-style homes that were built in 1935 and look like that. But I am advocating for a better plan aligned with our town's character and reduced in terms of mass and scale. Thank you for considering my comments.
Thank you very much.
All right. Hi. Logan Harvey, 578 Estamadera Drive. So I wasn't going to address this, but I'm born and raised in Sonoma. And so to me, the character of this town is the people that live in it. And as far as having front doors that look out onto other front doors and having, single family homes, that's something that's very nice. But there's a lot of people that I knew and I grew up with in Sonoma that lived in apartment buildings that were of the mass and scale of this. and I would love to be a supporter of this project. However, I was a big proponent of the Saha Affordable Housing Project, and when we dealt with that project, one of the main things that council discussed, or sorry, commission discussed, was the effect of growing up in a neighborhood that was all low income, and noticing that you were low income and dealing with that. And that was something that was harped on again and again, and it's a good point. I still supported that project. I think that project is appropriate and good. With this project, we have an opportunity to mix incomes in one place. And what I see here is no opportunity for a family in this project. Every single affordable housing that this project is proposing is one bedroom. They're very small and they're clustered together. You're looking at 483 square feet for every single one. Now, if you look at how much they're allowed to charge, you're looking at $1,542 a month, and that's $3.19 per square foot. The Saha project had 20 units, one-bedroom units, at 582 square feet. And they were only allowed to charge their tenants $862, which is a total of $1.41 per square foot. And I found some examples of apartments. You can look on Craigslist and do this yourself. Places in Sonoma that are market rate, and their square footage cost is actually lower than what this project is offering. So I think that's something to consider. In addition, this is a for sale unit, and the commission just had, or the council did it the other way this time, just had a Nexus study on housing. And what the Nexus study said was that when you have a for sale project, the affordable units should also be for sale. All of these affordable units are not for sale. They are all to rent units. And so these are the problems that I have with this project. I think it's important that we create spaces not only for single people in Sonoma, but also for families to live here. I think that's very important. I think that this is being a market rate affordable project, or part of it being a market rate affordable project, does provide space for teachers, for cops, for firefighters, things like that. But we should let them raise families here too. And so we should require that there be some 2-bedrooms, some 3-bedrooms in this project as well. And I would love to see them for sale, because that allows somebody to develop equity in their home, take that into the next home as a down payment, and buy another house and develop a way into the middle class for people here in Sonoma. Thank you.
Thank you, Logan.
Hi, David Eicher, Loma Court. I want to continue on what Logan was just saying. The apartments are much smaller. I just went through and looked at 14 different apartment complexes, again, online. And out of those, the average size is 650 square feet. So he's going to have, the project will be 486 square feet. So that's 25% smaller. And so, and at 100% AMI, basically, the developer has found a way to say they're affordable, but get market rate for them because they're so small. And I definitely agree with Logan. We need to have families, not just individuals. We need a whole mix. We have a housing shortage for everyone, families and individuals. So the affordable units should be mixed in sizes, the same mix as the regular market rate units. And also, I would definitely like to see a lower than 100% AMI. 100% AMI means that half the people are below that. And those are the people that need the help the most. We need to try to get low or very low affordable housing in these units, these exclusionary units. Because looking at the county, the 100% AMI right now for an allowance for a bedroom is, one bedroom is $1,762. Again, that's for such a small, that's more than market rate for such a small. So please, I know you're not going to listen to it now, but I'm going to do more research on this as well, because to see if there's any laws within California in terms of how you split out your affordable units in terms of sizes. And I'm glad they're going to be reviewing the parking, because I had a big problem with the parking because so many will be reserved. One more thing in terms of tenants, I would like to see conditions of approval saying no tasting rooms. Although there's no pressure right now, much beyond the plaza, as we know, if we get restrictions right now, a moratorium in the historic district, the downtown area, that's going to be pushed out down Broadway. So I would like to see that included so that because we do need local serving. We need the hairdressers, like the one that got kicked out by the Red Grape because of a tasting room, and and other things that are truly local serving. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Anybody else?
Good evening, Chair Felder and members of the commission. Broadway is the most historic feature in our community. Without Broadway, it would not be the terminal end of the El Camino. We would not be a mission state. It is the most important street in our community. It's the historic basis of our community. It should be treated that way. This property has with it great opportunity because of its zoning. That great opportunity demands great responsibility on the part of the developer and on you as the commission. This project does not rise to that responsibility. It is an import from Southern California. It is a community of garage doors. You drive to your garage door, you press the button, you go in, you get in your house, you hide away, you leave the next morning, and you never engage your neighbor. It is a commodity only. Instead of making a driveway, we should be making streets. We should be making a community on this property. If it's going to be residential, it should be like the residential community that we live in, not like the residential community of townhouses of Irvine, where everyone leaves in their car and arrives by their car and are lucky to wave to their neighbor in their car. We're lucky we've survived that form of development so far. This is the beginning of it. We've already got one project like this on Highway 12. It's at the corner, it's at the Big Bend. When you pass El Pueblo and those beautiful townhomes sit back 100 feet, 35 feet high, and you go back and you go into that no man's land between these buildings, you are nowhere. And you certainly are not in Sonoma. Those things sat vacant for years, partially because of the economy, but also because they didn't represent Sonoma. They weren't this place, and they still don't represent this place. This is exactly that partie. Raise 2 floors of living space above a garage, make a building that's too high, maximize the density, and who cares? Move on, collect the money, and go. This developer hasn't shown the responsibility and care for this property that it deserves, and it shouldn't be granted. And you don't have the information in front of you to grant the negative declaration for this. You don't have anything that allows you to take this project in context on Broadway. There's no demonstration of that. You have beautiful pictures, tightly framed, to show you it. It's as if it could go anywhere. It's not shown in the context of our community or Broadway, and you don't have the ability or the information to make that decision.
Thank you, Bill.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Patty DeFern, 465 East MacArthur Street. So as I drove here tonight on East MacArthur Street, I noticed that across from MacArthur Place on MacArthur Street, all the spaces were taken, with employees who park there, with people who are staying there that decide they'd rather park on the street, that it's easier to get out. So you're going to take with the exit and entrance, I don't know how many parking spots away. In addition to which, on 1.89 acres, you're putting 35 units. So that's at least 35 cars, more than likely more than that, and more than likely, because they're in 1,000 square feet, their garages will be filled, like mine, full of stuff. So you're going to find those cars on the street somewhere. It's a big issue for me. But more than that, It's the entrance to Sonoma. You're allowing a 4,000 square foot rectangular box right on the corner, as close to the street really as it can get. And when you look at the image, I have no idea how they're planning to get the expansive landscaping in that space. This project is a mistake in this space. It's substantially better than it was, but he did not listen to all the people who came to MacArthur Place the night that he had the open house, because it has not changed. And I think there'll be a lot of families in the 1,000 square feet that are offered there. So you're going to have no place at all for those children. Unfortunately, I believe you should send him back to start over. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patty. Is there anyone else that cares to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, bring it back to the commission, and let me remind you that since we have a recommendation from staff to continue this item, that what I would be looking for predominantly are you to discuss items that you think would be appropriate for the applicant developer to consider when they come back to us in May. With that, I'll open it up for discussion.
I'll start.
Okay.
All right. I think it would be very important to get a better grasp of the context. And I think if it wasn't a requirement of planning staff of the applicant, I think it's important to go ahead and show some visuals that do include the context. They need not necessarily be detailed to the nth degree like these illustrations are, but there's been great discussion about scale. I happened to spend some time on the site today, and just for my own edification, I was just interested in some heights. The existing car showroom, the front facade that's kind of crenellated at the top, I believe the highest point is approximately 26 feet. So that kind of gives me a sense. The historic barn in the back, to the best that I could do, because I did not have the best tape measure that would inch all the way to the top, it appeared to be about 30 foot. There's quite a depression that goes down there, and it's pretty close to, I think, what street level is. And that rather undistinguishable metal building is about 20 feet. But that helped me. But then I also went next door to the attorney's office to the north, and I measured, and his ridge line that is closest to the property is about 21 feet. He does have some additional ridge lines that are taller. So it would be very helpful if we kind of were able to capture the overall context, particularly, again, with the significance of this arterial coming into Sonoma. I do like the mix of unit types. I struggle with buildings 1 and 2, and I recognize that there are porches per se, but they're just, it still feels like those buildings are turning their back to Broadway. And that is very different than the character as you walk from MacArthur all the way up to the plaza. So I think architecturally, I'd love to have you challenge your architect to make 2 fronts. I've already expressed my concern about the bioretention along the front. I also have some concern about the space between buildings 5 and 6. Again, I believe according to the drawings, we had about a 20-foot wide corridor, fairly tall corridor, and that is kind of front door looking into front door. Again, I recognize that trying to provide as many different types as possible is a plus, but that space seems not very inviting. And lastly, the one that I struggle with most, but I certainly don't have the vision for an answer. I applaud the idea of having the vast majority of your parking hidden as far as from public sight. As I look down on the plan, though, it's hard not to realize that the internal circulation is just that. It's predominantly automobile. And I guess it's a trade-off. But I wish there was some sort of way to create a greater sense of internal community. And I believe that's it.
Who's next?
I'll go. I want to thank the applicant again and people from the public coming out to speak to this item. It's much appreciated. I wanted to start by saying the positives that I believe that the new site plan brings to the table. Some of these I brought up at the study session. One is that there is no driveway on Broadway, which to me is a huge positive. Also, the apartment element on Broadway is appropriately scaled and with the heights and setbacks compatible with the uses across the street and to the north. The unit sizes are now smaller overall, and I'm also very supportive of a two-story, 25-foot height building element along MacArthur Street. I'm also supportive of one driveway in and out. I also believe that there's now a better mix of housing types, and we are getting one additional BMR unit that we weren't getting before. My main concerns still remain are the three-story elements to the development. The garage on ground level with the 2 floors above, I think is still a negative aspect of the site plan. It seems to me that the covered parking and the townhouse concept still is driving more of an auto-oriented site plan as opposed to more of a community neighborhood feeling. And I think that I'm getting the sense from other members of the public that they're also feeling that same way. I do have some concerns about maybe having some additional information at hand since we have the opportunity and the luxury of having a public hearing in May. I thought it would be very helpful to, as Commissioner Welander pointed out, maybe some cross sections of other buildings, looking at a cross section of the development as it relates to buildings to the north, so we get a better sense of scale and the massing and the stepping up of the commercial building along that street. And also a concern of mine, which the environmental assessment didn't really look at, and that is the visual of the 3-story building elements. I believe those would be building 7. If you're a neighbor or even lucky enough to stay at the MacArthur Place Resort and Spa, you will be walking across onto the sidewalk and you'll be at Nathanson Creek, which is a public asset, community asset, where we spent a great deal of money and time developing and showcasing. However, we don't really have any sense at all after the trees that are removed from the site, with one remaining copsis of oak trees, which I don't think are more than 20 feet tall, what that project will look like from that vantage point. And so I'm hoping that in addition to the visual simulations that we have to the environmental document, that we can address that visual corridor so we get a better sense of what that 32-foot tall building will look like from MacArthur. I also mentioned before, I'm concerned about the large curb cut on MacArthur. I don't know if the city is able to reduce the curb cut, the duplex that they allowed, that very generous curb cut. But as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, and as a person not familiar with an area like that, getting in and out of that development could with such a large driveway could cause confusion, and I'm really concerned about the effects of that. Also, I would like to see a cross-section of what the ground floor commercial element looks like in relationship to the sidewalk. I want a better sense of the change in elevation. I like the idea and the concept of having a promenade and porch. I think that it speaks to some members of the public's concerned about creating a community, creating a sense of space and place. And I think that the developer is doing something really positive and creating an element like that. And I want to encourage that on Broadway, but I also just want to make sure it works. And I want to see actually how much landscape we have in relationship to the sidewalk and the building. Because right now it's kind of, you know, if you don't really look at it carefully, that covered porch really is really close to the property line. So I want to get a better visual and a better understanding of the relationship of the building to the sidewalk. Something that I also brought up has to do with the connection of the common open space with the commercial development and the development itself and the residential units. I want to make sure that this common open space actually is not end up becoming a dead zone, that it's enlivened, engaged, not only with the residents but also with the commercial development. I think that we can do a lot better with the site planning and looking at a way to better engage the commercial use with that space. And I think that we could maybe take a look at reorienting the bicycle storage so we can do that. And also, I would like to see the development pay homage to the original use of the site, the community college, and also the first high school of Sonoma. I believe that we have the opportunity within a community space, either in the common area or possibly in the community area that the applicant's describing, is to create a tutorial and a pictorial of the college and the high school, explaining what existed on that site before, providing visuals. And I think that maybe we could add that as a condition of approval and have it reviewed by the Historic Society and the League of Historic Preservation. And then lastly, that David Goodison did bring up is I want to hone in and lock in hours of operation for the commercial uses, so we're not dealing with a conflict. That way, if there are any uses that come in either as building permits or as use permits, we have a very clear distinction of what the hours of operation are that set the parameters for operating a commercial use on the building and the site. So those are my comments.
Anyone else want something to share?
Yeah, it seems to be that there is a demand for this notion of context, and I don't know, maybe people here have walked down a different Broadway than I have, or have a different sense of history, but for 75 going on 80, 90 years, there's been a car showroom that's sitting right on the sidewalk on Broadway. Across the street, there's been a gas station for 60 years or so. There's an apartment building with a parking lot that faces the frontage of Broadway. There's a parking lot that faces the frontage of First Street West. You go up and down First Street West, and you pretty much see parking lots, driveways, and garages. The commercialization of Broadway, driveways, parking lots. The building, the parcel immediately to the north is a commercial property, formerly a residential unit, but these units will essentially be looking, the northern units will be looking at driveway and parking lot. So I think it might be helpful to understand what the context is. I agree this project is somewhat autocentric, and yet, what is it called? The transportation demand element. Until such time as we have a transportation demand element in this community, I think we're going to continue to see autocentric development. We looked at a project at the hospital lot that had the sort of notion of alleyways, and that's kind of what I see here, which is kind of an old, it's maybe not a Sonoma form, but it certainly is a form that has historic precedent in terms of removing the cars from the front, putting them in the back. And I mean, I kind of, again, and we're talking a commercial space of 4,100 square feet. I think the current showroom there is about 6,000 and something square feet. So, you know, it's a smaller kind of scale. So I do think we need to get this context right, but I think we need to do it with data and not emotion. So I encourage the doing of that, the sort of put this in context. I think both historical context and the environmental context of where it sits right now.
I only have 3 little issues. And I'm going to start with the easiest one, traffic. Because that's one of my big bugaboos. But I don't see this as an issue here, and I've done some significant research on traffic calming measures, which I'm not sure I can support. So I do not, under any circumstance, agree to any curb extension. But in thinking of this, because I used to work at Williams-Sonoma, and I've seen people cross that street and get hit, the bumps, the raised pedestrian walkways, and if we kept the lights in them, I think would be very advantageous on Broadway, because you'll be able to see the pedestrian a little bit more clearly if it's a raised hump. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So I would agree, I think that would be ideal in certain key places on Broadway, but this is a speed control measure, and I don't know that we have a lot of speeding on Broadway, but I do agree with the bump outs. And I think that we have at least 2 that I know of, 1-lane slow points that to me are effective, because I drive down Broadway a lot because I'm always going down to the Bay Area, and coming home I find that very effective. So I don't see any issue with traffic. Parking I do, and I'm not inclined to give an exception for parking in our town. We are maxed, especially with MacArthur Place right over there, and I know that we made conditions that they take care of their employee parking on site, and I hope that they adhere to that, because I think this is all going to converge together. And because where are your employees going to park from this site? So parking is an issue for me, and I'm not inclined to give an exception for that. Now I'm going to get to the heart. My heart is affordable housing. And I do have a copy of the Nexus report here, and I have a copy of the City Council minutes here. And I know, and I've done some studying on this, that we've got a glut of 120% AMI and over, a glut. And we are creating a town of sheet music with A notes only, and that doesn't sit well with me. And I really think 110% AMI is too close to the 120% AMI. And I want to see the AMI come down to between the 60, 80, and 100 being the max. Because we have to, I know what it's like to have had money, and now I know what it's like being retired not to have money. And I live in a 500 square foot unit, and the rent is trying to inch up to $1,000 a month, and it's too much. It's way too much. So I come from that place of dealing with the middle income that has not been planned for in this town, and we need to take care of our people. And so when I see this Nexus report, It says Sonoma's 20% on-site requirement represents a moderate to strong requirement, and it is comparable to several nearby jurisdictions, and we're doing a good job. So that is great. We are doing a good job. But it goes on to say that it requires that ownership projects provide affordable ownership units. And then the City Council also says, as a related measure, it is recommended that inclusionary units required in for-sale developments be provided as for-sale units. And at this time, developers may choose to provide them as rentals, which means that the current program is not as effective. So I have a space planning background. I don't have an architectural design background. I'm not offended by the design, but I hope it does go to the design review to compensate for that. But I do appreciate the efficiency of the site plan, and I like this new horseshoe. And I like the architectural design. I have no qualms about it. And you lowered the height limit. And the fact of the matter is, we don't have any real estate here. We need housing, and density, unfortunately, is in our future, and we have to learn to deal with it. And so I just want to provide housing that teachers can afford, that the police force can afford, that the hospital workers can afford. Our service workers certainly can't afford 100% AMI rents. They can't afford it. I know they can't. And I just think we need to be more responsible to our community first. But I like your project, and I have no problem with the density or the design, but I have a problem with the affordability.
Well, I have to say that a lot of my opinions have been expressed already by other commissioners. There are just a couple of not huge items that I would like to address just because I don't think they've been covered yet tonight. One of them is the idea of the amount of site coverage. And I recognize that there has been an attempt to create permeable paving to make up for that deficiency on or the excessive site coverage. But there's an awful lot of paving on this site, and I think it's important that we adhere to the guidelines for what the site coverage should be and not give an exception to that. There's a lot of trees that are going to have to be removed from this site, and in the conditions for approval, it calls for a 2-to-1 replacement, but I noticed in a couple other places in the staff report that they only address a 1-to-1 replacement, so I'd like to get that clarified. Going back to the overall project and concept, I've sat through a lot of proposals for this site over my years on the Planning Commission, and I think we've come a long way. Certainly what's before us right now and what we'll be talking about in a May meeting has a much better chance for success in accomplishing what we need for Sonoma than what had gone before. But there are a lot of concerns by people in the community, by commissioners, that we haven't gone quite far enough. And some of that relates to just the engagement of what you have for the community you're creating. Some of it has to do with size and massing. I'm not so sure that we would ever be able to satisfy everyone to the complete level that they would like to have achieved. And I would hope that we can come to some kind of a compromise position that achieves most of what we're looking for, because it's important that this piece of property gets developed. I think it's a shame that it's sat there in its current state for so long. It's just that I think it still could use some improvement, and I'm hoping that the applicant can take yet one more opinion to heart to try to sharpen the pencil a little bit more, and to see what you can do to try to satisfy as much as you can of what the community feels should be appropriate for this site. I don't think I'll go back through some of the other issues that have been covered before, because I think you've got plenty of notes on that. So at this point, I think if we are done discussing, I would like to have someone make a motion to continue this item to the May meeting.
I'll move we continue this item till our May meeting.
I'll second that.
Is there any further discussion? I'll call for a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Jansen,
Yes.
Commissioner Willander,
Yes.
Commissioner Corrado,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner Cribb,
Aye.
Chair Felder.
Yes, so it's a 6-0 vote to continue.
Thank you very
That, we will
much.
conclude this item.
We appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
You didn't need anything else on this, did you, David?
No, thank you.
You'll have a chance. I'm just going to give the room a chance to clear for a couple seconds. With that, I think we'll move on then, David, and you have any issues update, other than what you dropped on us last time?
Nope, not tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to,
No, I've got my thing. Okay.
I'm going to open it up for commission, comments from the commission then, and I think that we have somebody with a burning desire to make some comments.
Burning desires. I want to open up the circulation element and relook at it and discuss it in full and make some amendments.
Well, the good news is you're going to get to do that.
Good.
So that is going to be in the context of a comprehensive general plan update, which is really as it should be. You don't want to look at the circulation element really in isolation. And I expect that the Planning Commission is going to be getting started in terms of discussions about the scope and approach that's going to be used in updating the general plan in the coming months. But at the same time, I have to just caution the Planning Commission that a general plan update is it's a lengthy process and will probably take 3 years to complete if we do it right.
Okay.
Do you remember a couple months ago I asked to talk about the zoning ordinances, see if we can't take a fresh look at that as well? How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel very open to that. It's just an issue, really, of getting things on, of just scheduling. There are a lot of different projects that we're working on. For example, last night I was at a town hall meeting on cannabis, and there will be another one of those next Wednesday. Coming up, we've got some community meetings on wine tasting. And so the planning department we are not trying to ignore anyone's priorities. It's just that there are a lot of priorities and a lot of projects that we're working on right now, and we will be going down the list, and we will be getting to your issues.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the commission?
David, I'd like to go back and just visit the comment that I shared regarding the applicant and the project about the requirement of giving context. One of the concerns that I have is that it's quite easy at times to be not overwhelmed, but enticed with what I call visual fluff and graphics. And so we're looking at stuff that that is rather pretty pictures and isolated. This project in particular, I would have loved to see, not in great detail, but just, again, a sense of scale. And I'm not sure if that's something that we can request.
Well, that's
or
something that we
ask.
have. I mean, again, we don't want to dwell on this project because the hearing has been closed on this project, but in the study session that was done on this project, there was a context diagram, and we can easily update it with this site plan. So that is something that we look for, and I apologize for not having it in tonight's packet.
And again, the only other thing that I wanted to stress is when illustrations are packaged together, partly because I'm old-fashioned and I don't do fancy computer renderings, those can be deceptive. And I really want to base decisions on as realistic and honest presentations as possible. So I don't have any other detail specific to say that other than the concept of, I want these pretty pictures to be honest.
The renderings that were prepared are accurate renderings of the project, and that is the value of renderings because they do provide a perspective, a visual perspective of the project that is more akin to what the human eye sees than a straight-on elevation, which are also, of course, included. But yeah, the perspectives do need to be accurately developed, and I'm confident that these ones were.
If that is it, we will look for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
All right, thank you all very much.
It wasn't that long ago that we used to be required to do street elevations, which, even though they're 2D flat, they do show the relationship and the mass of things. So maybe that'd be worthwhile, whereas the computer-developed renderings, the neighboring buildings would be hard to tell the scale, actually, when they're diminishing. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our architectural community for showing up.
Right, well, we're here in town, and we love living here, and we want it to be a beautiful town and a wonderful place to live for my children, too.